eBay was recently offering 20% off certain electronic retailers, which included one called TechfastAU, who offer fully operational systems for less than you could source the parts and build it yourself, which of course piqued my interest. I decided to take the plunge and order a Ryzen 5 platform build, but added a few upgrades that I thought were necessary to make the system more user-friendly. So let's take a look at what I got, shall we? Starting off with the CPU, which is the best bang for your buck currently going around, the Ryzen 5 2600 6-core 12-threaded monster, which is great for demanding workloads as well as gaming. The CPU is cooled by the AMD stock Stealth cooler, which comes included in the retail box and is good enough to handle a light overclock. The motherboard is a B45M2 from BioStar, which is a B350 Micro ATX motherboard I paid to upgrade over an A320 board, so I could overclock the CPU to squeeze some extra performance out of it. This motherboard is quite basic with its I/O consisting of one PS2 keyboard and one PS2 mouse port, a HDMI 1.4, a VGA connector, 4 USB 3.1 Gen 1 ports, 2 USB 2s, gigabit LAN and audio jacks. Unfortunately, to cut costs as much as possible, this is one of those B350 boards with only 2 RAM slots, which is a little underwhelming if you wanted to upgrade this setup in the future, as you are limited to only one extra slot. Speaking of RAM, you get a single stick of Team Group 2666MHz DDR4, which is great to see a better clock speed than the generic 2133, but it does suck being stuck with single channel memory and all the downfalls that it offers. I was going to upgrade to 16GB of RAM, but they were charging $119 for an extra 8GB stick, which is ridiculous as you can pick up another Team Group 8GB stick from Centacom for just $59. The graphics card is the star of this build, and I was pleasantly surprised to see an 8GB Sapphire version of the RX 580, which is one of the best brands, with a decent cooler and a backplate included, which is a bonus. The power supply has me worried, as it's Allied PC's OEM branded with no 80+ certification, only 360 watts over the 12V rail, and doesn't even have the right connectors for the GPU, instead having to resort to 2 Molex adapters for the 6-pin power. If I planned on doing any upgrades to this system, I would swap this power supply out immediately as it's questionable at best. Also, on an aesthetics note, the cables are all catch up and mustard, which makes this build look like garbage. For storage was originally a 120GB SSD, but I upgraded that to a 240GB instead to store a few extra files or a game or two. Thankfully the drive is a Crucial BX500, which is a reputable brand and a decent little drive, even if it's on the cheaper side of things. I couldn't actually find where this drive was to begin with, but eventually I located it at the rear of the case behind the power supply, screwed into 2 metal fold-out tabs, and yes, the SATA power cable came half connected. I also decided to add on a 2TB hard drive to the order for mass storage, which ended up being a 2.5-inch Seagate Barracuda 5400 RPM drive, which is more expensive than the standard 3.5-inch 7200 RPM version I was hoping for. This is just plain dumb and actually made me mad when I saw it. This case is ATX sized and called a Leaper Pro by TechFast, but it's obviously from the Chinese choose your own brand name section, as I recently built a PC in this exact case, except it was branded by Armageddon and called the Kagami K1. There is an adjustable RGB strip down the front, which can be changed with the reset switch instead of actually resetting the computer like it probably should be doing. The side panel window is tinted acrylic and allows you to see the entire build, but with the only light source being from the Sapphire text on the GPU, it's really not worth looking at. A few cheap Molex LED strips could have really made this build stand out, but instead it's just dull and uninteresting to look at. There are 2 Molex powered fans installed, one at the rear as an exhaust, and one being practically useless at the front as there is minimal airflow through the closed off front panel. Cable management is acceptable, with the back area cleaned up quite well, but the front can probably be best summed up as just okay. Let's talk about the cost of this build, as the initial PC was 749 Aussie dollars, the SSD upgrade was 27, changing the motherboard from A320 to B350 was 29, and the addition of the 2TB hard drive was 83, bringing the total to 888 Aussie dollars. But that's not the final cost, as after using the save 20% code, the whole thing only turned out to be $710.40, which is cheaper than buying the parts and assembling it yourself. On top of that, the system gets assembled for you, tested, and express shipped to your door for free with a 1-year warranty. How do they manage to do that at such a low price? For comparison, here's a parts list from PC Case Gear with the cheapest parts I could find, and it's still $831 before adding in the shipping fee, and you have to assemble it yourself. The computer took over 3 weeks and several emails to even be posted out, despite TechFast having the listing set to the default 2 to 3 business days, so that is something that needs to be fixed, as if you read their eBay buyers' feedback, this is one of the main issues people have had. Something I found interesting is my invoice states the computer was sent by TechFast, but the side of the actual box states it's from Origin PC. Weird, but okay. Along with the computer, they also send you the motherboard box, which has an extra SATA cable and all the warranties and manuals associated with the components, as well as any promotional game codes manufacturers may have included in the box, as I got a free copy of the Division 2 because of the Ryzen 2600 CPU. The PC came configured with an unactivated version of Windows 10 Home 64-bit, which they weirdly configured the Windows username to be TechFast Australia. All the necessary drivers were also installed, and surprisingly MSI Afterburner, but it was set to its default state. Time to do some benchmarking, where I tested the system at both stock settings and a few tweaks by me to see how far I could push it. I managed to overclock the CPU to 3.9 GHz across all cores at 1.27 volts. The GPU only managed to boost the core clock to 1450 MHz from 1411 and the memory to 2050 MHz from 2000 MHz. I also managed to bump the RAM speed up to 3200 MHz at 1.35 volt with CL16 timings. All games were tested at 1080p and settings will be listed under the game's title. I ran the CPU through a Cinebench R20 stress test in which I received a score of 2814 at stock and 2975 once overclocked. I also put together a few clips of 4K 60fps 12:1 Blackmagic RAW footage with a simple colour LUT applied and some music in DaVinci Resolve 16 and rendered it out on a time of 2 minutes 29 at stock and 2 minutes 20 once overclocked. Temperature wise, the CPU idled at 35 degrees at both stock and overclock settings and reached a maximum of 78 degrees stock and 90 degrees once overclocked under a 20-minute AIDA64 stress test. I did manage to achieve an overclock of 4 GHz on the CPU, but the temps were spiking over 100 degrees, so with a beefier cooler I could have achieved even more of an overclock. The GPU idled at 25 degrees at stock and 77 degrees under load, but once overclocked it idled at 32 degrees and 79 degrees after 20 minutes of Unigine Heaven 4.0. In conclusion, on a 20% off sale, I would definitely recommend buying one of these pre-built gaming PCs if you're in the market for a new PC or just don't know how to build one for yourself. At full price, I would lean more towards a no, as the longevity of the power supply is questionable and I prefer to build my own with higher quality components for a little more cost just to put my mind at ease. Some of their upgrade options are questionable and poorly priced, so stick with stock configuration and buy the components you want to upgrade or swap out separately so you don't get stuck with a stupid 2.5-inch hard drive or less than stellar motherboard. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like, and if you really enjoyed it, please consider subscribing for more reviews and other content in the future. If you have a suggestion, question or criticism, leave a comment. Thank you very much for watching.